Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, TJ Mabardi. Today is Monday, March 11th, and we have an absolutely loaded day across the sports world. Today we're going to be fixating on a lot of the free agency moves, as today is the first official day of NFL free agency. So we will be getting to all the biggest moves of today. We will also be recapping some of the big time moves that happened this weekend, from Russell Wilson to Jerry Jeudy and everything else as well. Then we're going to be giving updates as best we can on all of the breaking news stories in the NFL today, before finally capping off the show by talking some college basketball with the final regular season polls released. And we're now less than a week away from Selection Sunday. So very fun time in sports right now. Just before we get into the show, a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you may be keeping up with us, and to use the comment section for any of our live viewers. Make this show as interactive as possible. We'll try and address as many comments as we get, and for getting your comments the priority they deserve as well, if you wouldn't mind using the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, that is gsmcpodcast.net. You could leave a tip or donation. It would be greatly appreciated. But getting into the first segment of the day, we're going to be starting with Russell Wilson to the Steelers and that move on its own, as well as sort of the other effects it will have on the quarterback offseason market. So it was late last night where it was reported that Wilson had agreed to a contract with the Pittsburgh Steelers. The deal will be 1 year, $1.21 million. So obviously very cheap here for the Steelers. A little bit, you can argue this is a no-brainer move. Now, especially, it sort of boils down to what your expectations for Russell Wilson are. I don't think he would be the best backup quarterback necessarily in the league next year, but he has a very real chance to take the starting job from Kenny Pickett, who has been a little bit underwhelming with the Steelers through his first two seasons, and potentially set himself up, Wilson that is, for a rejuvenation after a couple of very disappointing seasons there in Denver. Now, it was very clear that for the price that the Broncos paid for Russell Wilson, he was not that level of a quarterback anymore. But for the Steelers on this one, the risk reward is very low in my eyes, where at worst case, especially too, not that ideally the situation plays out this way, but if Russell Wilson doesn't pan out and he is harming the team in some sense, the Broncos just paid him $38 million to leave the team. So in terms of PR wise and the backlash that they would get, it's pretty much non-existent. Now, that's only if things devolve to such a place where Russell Wilson is basically unplayable and him being on the roster is harming them. But chances are that's not the way that this is all going to play out. And he comes into this Steelers situation. Price clearly was not a factor for him, probably somewhat in a ways to hurt the Denver Broncos after all of the craziness that went on and some of the toxicity that took place between Sean Payton and him late last season, where he was owed $39 million from the Broncos regardless of what he did this upcoming season. And what he signs for was just going to come out of what the Broncos have to pay him. So ultimately, he signs a $1.2 million deal. That means the Broncos' price is going to drop a little bit to just under $38 million, but still having them to be in this tough situation where their roster is not going to be where ideally they need to be. We already saw them cut ties with receiver Jerry Jeudy this past weekend in an attempt to save some money. So the Broncos are in a really tough spot. And it's interesting specifically to me how early Russell Wilson decided to get this contract agreement done, because for a lot of the teams, a lot of the buzz that was going around is the fact that Russell Wilson could have been a backup option for teams that are pursuing Kirk Cousins, and he would have been a very cheap option coming off of that. As we saw, he was willing to take such an undervalued, you could say, contract. And for a team that maybe doesn't want to pay Kirk Cousins the money he's going to get this offseason, Wilson could have been a nice veteran option in replace of that. But Wilson sort of took the power into his own hands here, where he said, I want to have first control of wherever I end up here. And he signs ahead of even free agency is fully open. And I think that this is a nice landing spot for him. I sort of doubt that the Steelers have already guaranteed him the starting quarterback job over Pickett, but I also think that it's no secret. We see that Kenny Pickett has not been a very productive player over the course of the first 2 seasons there in Pittsburgh. This is a Steelers organization that's been really handicapped by the level of quarterback play, even dating back to the final years of Ben Roethlisberger's career. He was clearly not at an elite level, and they were sort of limping their way into these avoiding losing seasons, as Mike Tomlin always does, but really weren't all that threatening because of the lack of firepower on offense. Now, is Russell Wilson going to be the one that elevates them? That's still definitely up for debate. That is, again, even if he does win the starting job, because it was just at the Combine a few weeks ago where Steelers GM Omar Khan said that he was on record saying he had full faith in Kenny Pickett going forward. Now, this can still be the case and potentially find some sort of way where he takes a back seat for a season and comes back on the other side. I don't think that this Russell Wilson to Pittsburgh is necessarily a long-term solution, but all things are really on the table right now. And we saw just last season, he had 26 touchdowns, Russell Wilson, that is, passing touchdowns, which is 2 times more than Kenny Pickett has had in his first 25 career games. So there was definitely a need from a higher level of production at the quarterback position for Pittsburgh. Is it a skill issue with Kenny Pickett? Was it the rest of the offense, specifically the play calling from Matt Canada, that was holding him back? These are all still questions that we really have to find out about. But as we know, this Steelers organization, led by Mike Tomlin as the head coach, has just been able to stay afloat despite some other circumstances, and frankly, them not being all that great of a team, but they were able to come out to a tremendous start early this year based off of their defense. That defense should still be in place for the most part headed into next season, and it's just a matter of what kind of quarterback play can they get on the other end. I think Russell Wilson will be able to win this starting job. I also don't know if it's going to be all that different of a situation from Denver. I feel like it's a lot of excuses for Russell Wilson based off of how the Broncos situation went, and some of the management behind the scenes was definitely pretty terrible from Sean Payton and that group, but there was clearly a level of frustration that they were paying all this money for Wilson, who, if you look at his individual stats, they weren't bad, but I also think that if you watch these games with Wilson, he clearly wasn't pushing the needle for them in very many ways at all. And a lot of people who are believers in Russell Wilson still point to that 5-game win streak that they had after the tough start to the year, but they were able to work themselves back into contention. And a lot of people thought that it was Wilson being the catalyst for that change. I don't see it that way. I think that it was really the defense that was able to take over during that stride. Now, I know the defense allowed 70 points early in the year, and they're clearly not the level of a Denver Broncos defense that we would have expected. I feel like just something about the identity of the Broncos. You see the logo, you see how dominant their defense was when they won the Super Bowl in the mid-2010s, and you sort of feel like they can be a good group. They were not for a lot of last year, but they were able to, during that winning stretch, really carry the Broncos, where in that 5-game win streak, they turned opponents over 16 times. So that is more than 3 turnovers per game. And realistically, it is very hard to lose games when that is the case. And yet, they were still walking a fine line even during this stretch where 3 out of the 5 games were decided by 2 points or fewer. Russell Wilson threw for over 200 yards in just one of those 5 games. So credit to Russ, where he wasn't turning the ball over. He wasn't the problem with that Broncos team. It was just 3 turnovers in that stretch as a whole. But I also just don't think that he does all that much to elevate the team's success as a whole. And he had a couple nice fourth quarters in that stretch as well. The Vikings game in particular, he was nice down the stretch, and overall, he was competent in these fourth quarters. And again, he wasn't harming the team. He just really wasn't elevating them. Maybe that's something that, I mean, it's a little bit similar, really, if you look back to the Steelers season from last year about what happened with how the Steelers played out their year, where they had a good record through the first half of the season based off of the defense really carrying the ways for them. And Kenny Pickett actually shined in his few moments that he did in the fourth quarter, putting together some of these game-winning drives. So I just think the two quarterbacks are very comparable, and I feel like I'm a little bit on an island in terms of, not that I think that Kenny Pickett is going to be some elite franchise guy. I just don't think he's that much of a downgrade versus Russell Wilson. So we'll see how that all plays out in Pittsburgh itself. I don't expect them to really be all that much better. They're in a very competitive AFC North division where I do think that the Ravens and the Bengals should both be better. The Browns are competitive as well. So that's a little bit just out of their control in terms of some surrounding factors. But I don't know. They're going to be a very interesting team to watch this season. Now, this does have an effect on the rest of the QB market, where I think this probably, again, him making this deal before free agency even started, I think it helps Kirk Cousins out in terms of the amount of money that he will be able to fetch in his next contract, given the fact that there isn't this other veteran guy who is a cheap backup option. There are a couple bridge quarterbacks that could sort of be in play, Jacoby Brissett, Gardner Minshew, those types, but in terms of teams that want to take a step forward and be a lot more competitive, I think that Kirk Cousins is really your only option at this point on the open market for getting somebody who could possibly elevate your roster. And again, all credit to Russell Wilson on this one to sort of take control of the power, make his own decision prior to Cousins even being able to legally enter that legal tampering period that kicked off today. And as a result, we are going to see a big time shakeup in what we were expecting in the quarterback market. This does also, of course, take the Pittsburgh Steelers out of the equation for Justin Fields, as we sit at a little bit of a stalemate in terms of the type of value he may be bringing in for the Bears looking to trade him. And we had another one of the quarterbacks selected in that first round with him also get traded this past weekend for not much at all. So we will be getting into that and all of the rest of the stories from this past weekend before opening up the floodgates for this free agency and talking about all the moves that are currently taking place as we speak. So we are going to be taking our first break, and when we come back on the other side, we will be wrapping up the remainder of the moves that took place this weekend. So stick with us. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Just got a chance to check my phone and look at some of the moves that have broke since we started this show, and we are in for a loaded free agency class this year. Super excited to get into all of that. But before we move on to today's moves, I do just want to finish off with yesterday's moves. We had some news with the quarterback carousel, of course, headlined by Russell Wilson, but some additional moves as well, and just some various contract extensions, some releases, and a trade demand. So we're going to touch on all of that. Just a reminder for our live viewers to use that comment section. Talk to me about what your thoughts are on the free agency period here. Make this show as interactive as possible. But starting out here, we are going to talk about the other big contract that it was handed out with the quarterback market this offseason, and that was Baker Mayfield agreeing to a $100 million deal with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to stay with them. Ultimately, I don't think this is too shocking of a move. It is expensive, which maybe caught some people off guard, but $30 million was pretty much the price it was going to be. Now, who were these other teams that were really vying for Baker? Hadn't really been reported, so I don't know. Maybe that was by design of the Buccaneers not wanting to get into a bidding war. 33 mil, I suppose, is a pretty fair price for the level of production that he got last season. It was a career year for Baker, finished with career highs in most passing statistics. He was inside the top 10 in a lot of these categories as well across the NFL as a whole. So the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are still in a pretty weak NFC South division, and I do think that they have another chance to run it back and make their way into the playoffs again. They weren't a tremendous team last season necessarily. They finished 9-7. They had gotten blown out to the Saints with just a couple weeks left in the year, and at that point, that was when I was sort of buying into them, and they reminded me that they're not that level of a great team, but they do end up making the playoffs. They do end up winning a playoff game. So I think to abandon the process as a whole and accept taking a step back when you were just a playoff winning team, it's a little bit tough to do so. And Baker still has a lot of doubters, but I don't really see all that cause for concern in terms of him regressing again. I know that this has been a little bit of a story you can argue in his career is when he led the Browns to the playoff win. Next year, he took a step back. I personally feel like that was more so and due to the fact that he was playing through an injury. He was trying to gut it out for his team, and as a result, the Browns there blamed him for not being good enough and they moved on from him. But I feel like Baker should be able to return to a very similar form, having another year in the Tampa Bay offense. Now, they did lose their offensive coordinator, Dave Canales, who I think is a very quarterback-friendly coach. We saw him help bring Baker back this year. We saw him the year prior in Seattle help rejuvenate Geno Smith. So I do think that this is a loss, but they were able to bring back Mike Evans again. So Baker will still have his number one option. I do like the offensive line. I know that they got pushed around a little bit against Detroit in the divisional round, but they have the cornerstone tackle in Tristan Wirfs, and I think that they can continue to build on this. I would like to see them go out and get a running back. We've seen 2-3 now, I suppose, of the top guys already exit in free agency. So we're going to have to see what they do as a whole. But again, I don't think this was all too shocking of a move for the Buccaneers. Briefly here, on the note of quarterback, we also did have a QB trade in Mac Jones being moved from the Patriots to the Jaguars. The return for him was just a 6th round pick. This was more so of the Patriots turning the page here after things with Mac did not go well the past 2 seasons, and the Jaguars hoping to secure more of a reliable backup situation after CJ Beathard was, it's CJ Beathard. The expectations weren't high, but he was not the answer when Trevor Lawrence was dealing with those injuries. The question I feel like is sort of natural to ask at this point is, can Mac Jones ever be a starter in the NFL again? The odds are that the answer is no, but I do think that if Mac Jones had ended up in a different situation coming into the NFL, he could have been a lot better. Would he have ever been elite? No, but I always sort of saw him as a Kirk Cousins ceiling type of player, which isn't a bad comparison by any means. Kirk Cousins, he's going to get paid this offseason. So was he ever going to be elite? No, but he could have been a starter on a playoff team. He was his rookie year when he helped lead the Patriots to double-digit wins and a playoff appearance, and he wasn't even the issue. I know they got stomped by the Bills in the playoffs that year, but I wouldn't have put that on Mac by any means. He was good his rookie year, and maybe he can get a fresh start here in Jacksonville where the expectations are lower. He can spend a year on the bench, sort of get his fundamentals back under him and try and turn this around. But enough on that. Moving on to the Chiefs here, who were able to get Chris Jones back on a monster deal. 5 years, $158.8 million. $101 million guaranteed. So this is a huge deal for Jones, who was the top priority for the Chiefs coming into the offseason, and he ends up getting paid. They treated him like that, gave him an annual salary of $31.75 million per season. It is very well deserved. Chris Jones is the premier player at his position. This is slightly more than the contract that Aaron Donald fetched a couple years ago, coming off of their Super Bowl win. Chris Jones is a couple years younger, so I think that this naturally makes sense. He will be the second highest paid defender in the NFL next season, only behind Nick Bosa in terms of annual salary. The Chiefs talked up a big game about making sure that Chris Jones was going to be back, and they brought in the money to do so. So have to feel good about that if you are a Chiefs fan, because he is just so important to that locker room, to that defense, and they're going to have likely some other changes around him. So making sure he is back was a big deal for them. We also had a trade that sent Jerry Jeudy from the Broncos to the Browns. The Browns gave up just a 5th and 6th round pick for Jeudy. Jeudy, I wouldn't consider him a bust in terms of him being an unplayable player, but he's definitely been disappointing after being the 15th overall pick in the 2020 draft. He had the best season of his young career in 2022, but took a step back last season. And it's tough looking back at that 2020 class because he was the second wide receiver drafted, and many of the standout guys in the NFL currently were a part of that class as well. CeeDee Lamb went 2 picks after him. Justin Jefferson, Brandon Ayuk were both first rounders. T. Higgins and Michael Pittman went early in the second round. So definitely disappointing, Judy. I think that there is still a level of talent there that can be tapped into, and it's just not going to be with the Broncos if it ever is going to come into fruition again, because the Broncos are in a very tough salary cap position. They were going to have to pay Judy just under $13 million this upcoming season, so they decided to part ways with him there. They get some low draft capital in return, but I gotta say, this is a pretty nice deal for the Browns, where they trade just a 5th and 6th round pick, which is the exact same package to a degree of what they gave up for Amari Cooper ahead of the 2022 season. And Cooper has been a great pickup for them. He was phenomenal down the stretch of this past season to help them get to the playoffs. So this could be a really nice payout for the Browns next year. Deshaun Watson is ideally going to come back for them. He's been disappointing, to say the least, since being traded to Cleveland. Now this is the year where, if he's going to turn things around, this is probably it, and the Browns can save some sort of face if he does do so. But on the note of wide receivers, we also had updates on 2 of the franchise tagged wide receivers this weekend in T. Higgins and Michael Pittman. Just referred to them as well as part of that draft class with Jerry Jeudy. Pittman and the Colts agreed this morning on a contract extension, 3 years, $71.5 million. Talked about it when they first tagged him. I love the idea of the Colts locking Pittman down. He's a great player. He seems to be very well liked and well respected within that locker room. A real professional guy, and I think that having Anthony Richardson ideally come back from injury this year and try and ramp up for his sophomore year, they are going to want to have a player such as Pittman in the locker room to help elevate the play of Richardson and that receiver group as a whole, which does have some talent in a young Josh Downs. They have a handful of different tight ends that they can throw out there as well. The Colts were right on the brink of making the playoffs last season, despite Richardson missing the majority of the year and Gardner Minshew stepping in for them. So maybe they can take the next step in this upcoming year. But on the other end, while Pittman and the Colts work out a long-term deal, the sides between T. Higgins and the Bengals are very far apart, so much so that T. Higgins reportedly requested a trade this morning. The talks of a long-term deal haven't been productive over the past couple seasons, and now he is on the franchise tag for this upcoming season. He wants to find a new place to settle down long-term. I never thought that a long-term deal in Cincy really made all too much sense for the franchise, where they're already going to pay Jamar Chase, who is a better receiver, and they have so much money going into Joe Burrow over the course of the next handful of years. So I didn't think that wrapping up all that money in T. Higgins made a lot of sense for them. It is going to be interesting for the Bengals here, where I personally think if they can get T. Higgins to not hold out and play through the course of the season, it might be just the most beneficial move for them to stick with him on the 1-year deal and try and work for that Super Bowl this upcoming season. Higgins had a down season last year, and granted that was with a very injury-riddled quarterback situation with Burrow last year, and the level of quarterback play wasn't as high, but I'm not sure what they could necessarily get for him in some of these trade talks, and I feel like for them, compensation would be nice, but I also feel like it wouldn't be harmful for them to just take this season as it is, understand you're going to lose the guy in free agency next year, and give it everything you have to be a Super Bowl contender this year, because I do believe they are sort of the biggest rivals towards the Chiefs in the AFC, and I think it could be very beneficial unless they're going to get some real compensation and find a way to, find another star receiver in the draft, which is still very possible. This is a really nice wide receiver class, but the Bengals have had one of the best receiver rooms in the NFL the past handful of years, with Chase, with Higgins, with Tyler Boyd, and now they're going to have to make some decisions. I do like the guy that they drafted out of Princeton last year. He showed a couple flashes, I thought, but I feel like they should, if they can, run back into next season with T. Higgins on the franchise tag. And other than that, the other big storyline from this weekend was Eric Armstead being released from the 49ers. This wasn't all too surprising either. Armstead is a very nice player. He was a little bit of a slow developer in that 49ers system, and he worked his way up into a very nice player, but he also was set to be very expensive for the 49ers this year. San Francisco can save themselves a handful of crucial money going into next year by parting ways with him. And again, Armstead, for as nice of a player as he is and sort of the name recognition that comes with him, I also feel like when it got to the playoffs, it was just very underwhelming in terms of the level of production that their front seven was able to get. Now, Nick Bosa sort of turned himself around. Chase Young had some moments, but definitely underwhelming from what was seen to be as one of the best front fours in the NFL. The Niners can save up to as much of $17.8 million with the release of Armstead, so we will keep you updated on those tabs. But that is going to be all for this segment. We are going to take our second break, and when we come back on the other side, we will be diving into all of today's action, trying to keep up with as much as we can. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
All right, welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, where we have an extremely busy day with free agency. As we just went to break, we have some breaking news that Kirk Cousins has signed a 4-year contract with the Falcons. It sounds like we don't have an exact price range yet, but a big-time move for the Falcons to bring in their guy in Cousins. This has been a team that has taken some steps in the right direction over the past couple seasons. I love the hire of Raheem Morris as their next head coach. We saw their defense make some strides last year, and they still have lots of options offensively in terms of weapons, and now they go and ideally get their franchise guy. Cousins is now 35 years old. He's coming off of a torn Achilles injury, so there are some risks involved here, but I do think that this is going to be a very nice signing. You also have to keep in mind that with the running backs that Atlanta has, they're going to be able to lean on the run game and the defense a little bit more. And they really just needed more of a steadying presence in the locker room for them after coming off of a season with Taylor Heineke and Desmond Ridder. It was a very rough stretch. They were losing games quite exactly because of their level of quarterback play. So I think this is a big time deal. Interesting what the Vikings are going to do from here. For a while, it seemed like that was going to be a reunion between the Vikings and Kirk Cousins. But over the course of the past week, Kevin O'Connell hinted at the fact that this may be headed in separate directions, and we get the answer to that today. I think this is a Falcons team that, as we were just talking about with the Buccaneers in the last segment, them bringing in Baker Mayfield for another 3 seasons, really, the NFC South is very much there for the taking, and the Falcons were able to win, 7-8 games last year, despite having, I think, personally, the worst plan at quarterback headed into the season. So they definitely could be closer to real contention. Is tough because they still are a bit of a ways away, but I think that they are taking steps in the right direction. Absolutely. Again, 7-10 last year with that level of quarterback play. Could definitely see them take the next step. We have some news on the running back front, where this is obviously a pretty monumental offseason in terms of some of the free agent running backs, where there is so much talent available, and it's been a conversation over the course of the past 2 off seasons about how much will they make. Well, we have some moves already. We have DeAndre Swift signing to the Bears. This was a 3-year deal worth $24.5 million. We had the Titans signing Tony Pollard to a 3-year deal worth just under that, $24 million. And we have the Packers signing Josh Jacobs. Don't know if we have the contract details on that just yet. I'll start off by saying I'm pretty surprised that DeAndre Swift got what he did from the Bears, just over $8 million per year. Swift is a nice player, but I also feel like in this very crucial offseason for GM Ryan Poles and head coach Matt Eberflus, that this isn't necessarily a huge needle pusher move, and the fact that he got more than Tony Pollard did, I don't feel great about that necessarily. Now, I know Pollard comes with concerns as well. He had a down year. A lot of people are wondering whether or not he can be a true every down type of back, but I also feel like the upside is still probably there with Pollard more than it is for Swift. Now, for the Bears here, again, I think that it makes sense to some degree that you are trying to surround whoever your next quarterback is going to be. Presumably Caleb Williams, but still could be a little bit up in the air, and wanting to add a veteran running back to that group is understandable. I just also don't know if DeAndre Swift would have been my first pick for that. Now, we will see how the rest of this plays out. Gotta say, and again, I don't know if we have an exact price just yet on Josh Jacobs, but I do really like the move of the Packers going to get Josh Jacobs, where they've had a good run game in the past with Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon as well. A.J. Dillon is a free agent. Not sure exactly what the situation is with Aaron Jones because he is under contract for another year, but there was also talk that if they couldn't work out some sort of a longer-term deal, that they would potentially look into releasing him. I mean, if things stand as they currently are, and they have a two-headed monster between Josh Jacobs and Aaron Jones, that would be unbelievable, I think, to watch. And the Packers are a team that is rapidly ascending. We saw that down the stretch of last year. And I think that this could be a really great move for them long term. Again, going to have to see how they handle the Aaron Jones situation, but definitely a nice move for the Packers there. They have also made a couple other moves, more so in the fact that they are losing a couple guys. They are expected to cut linebacker Devondre Campbell. Campbell has been an all-pro player for them in the course of the past few years. He's a nice player, but they did decide to part ways with him. It hasn't been official yet, but this is being rumored. And they also lost one of their defensive backs as well. The Jaguars had signed one of their defensive backs. As I'm sort of trying to scramble through here, Darnell Savage was let go in free agency this year. The Jaguars bring him back, as the Jaguars have been a little aggressive here to start off the free agency period. It was first with the deal of them bringing in Gabe Davis earlier today, and they bring in Savage as well. I guess moving on to the Jaguars in this situation here, the Gabe Davis move was interesting to me. I think Davis is a nice player, but he's a little bit one-dimensional in my eyes. He's a big-time, big play guy, and it was clear that the Bills were missing him during the playoffs last year. But they also have, dished out a good amount of money to receivers over the course of the past few seasons. Now, when you have a young quarterback on a rookie deal like they do in Trevor Lawrence, I definitely am never going to disagree with that idea, where it's not like Christian Kirk or Zay Jones or even Evan Ingram were seen to be tremendous additions to that Jags team a couple off seasons ago, but they've all panned out really nicely in helping Trevor Lawrence take some steps in the right direction. Now they bring in Gabe Davis again. What is he going to bring on a play-to-play basis? But things really soured between him and the Bills this past year to end the season. So he finds himself a new home with the Jags, who are hoping to take a step back in the right direction after missing the playoffs last year and really collapsing down the stretch of this one. One of my favorite moves of the day so far is the Raiders bringing in defensive tackle Christian Wilkins. Wilkins is an absolute beast. I have been on record saying I think that he is one of, if not the most impactful defender for the Dolphins the past couple seasons, and I would have liked them from their front office perspective to try and hold on to him, but he gets a monster deal, 4 years, $110 million, and this Raiders team that is going under new leadership with Antonio Pierce. We saw the way that all of the players rallied behind him last year. They add Wilkins to a defensive front that already has Max Crosby, so that is going to be quite the scary group for opposing quarterbacks in the next few years. I'm absolutely locked in figuring out how that is all going to play out. I think it's going to be, especially when you're the Raiders here, you are in the AFC West and you are playing Patrick Mahomes multiple times in a season. You're going to want to add up as much juice as you can on the defensive side of the ball in terms of guys who can disrupt the quarterback. That's what they currently have. They obviously still have questions at the quarterback position after releasing Jimmy Garoppolo earlier this season. So we'll see. I wouldn't be surprised if they find their way into drafting a quarterback in the upcoming draft, but we will have to see with all of that. A couple moves on the offensive line where we saw the Cowboys lose center Tyler Biadasz, who was a really nice starter for them last year. He reunites with former, not that they were on the same side of the ball, but with former defensive coordinator Dan Quinn in the Commanders in Washington, where they bring him in. I think another nice move for a Commanders team that is going to look to reestablish their quarterback position this offseason. You go get a leader on the offensive line, which is nice. And then the other big offensive line move that we will finish off this segment with is, as we get some more breaking news. So the offensive line move was Jonah Jackson of the Detroit Lions signing with the LA Rams. Nice move for the Rams to bring in another offensive lineman and continue to try and solidify their front line after it was re-signing Kevin Dotson the other day. But we did just get the breaking news here from Ian Rappaport that Saquon Barkley has signed a deal with the Philadelphia Eagles. 3 years, $37.75 million for Barkley. He is likely, again, not knowing the Jacobs contract, the highest paid of the running back group for this offseason class, over $10 million. Was curious if that number was going to be broken, and the Eagles do. This makes a lot of sense in my eyes, where the Eagles are obviously a very run-heavy team, or at least when they made the Super Bowl a couple seasons ago, their run game was sort of their mainstay, and everything they got from Hurts as a passer was a bonus. This past season, it seemed like they were a lot more reliant on the pass game, and while that's not necessarily a bad thing, it's the NFL world that we live in today. The fact that we saw Jalen Hurts not really quite be able to live up to the level of what we were hoping for. There was some weird stuff going on, especially down the stretch of the year. I mean, early in the year, him and A.J. Brown were getting into it. The two really started connecting and clicking, and then everything fell apart for them down the stretch of the season. But I do think that Barkley fits really nicely into the type of offense that the Eagles are going to try and run. A lot of turnover with the Eagles this offseason, getting two new coordinators on each side of the ball, so we will see how they respond to that. Kellen Moore is who they brought in from the Chargers this past season, and it's going to be interesting to see if they can reaffirm themselves as one of the top threats in the NFC. But that is all we have time for on this subject. We're going to be getting into some college basketball on the other side. If we have some other breaking news, may dive into that as well. But just under a week away from Selection Sunday, want to give the updates on the polls and what we are looking at going forward here. So stick with us and we will be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. It has been a loaded day of NFL news, from this past weekend to the updates that are breaking as we speak. So I believe we got to the majority of the moves that we've seen so far today. I will be back tomorrow, obviously, with a little bit more of a comprehensive and a little bit more thought out because we were giving a lot of initial reactions on the show today. But I did want to finish off the show by talking some college basketball as we head into the final week of the season before March Madness. Extremely exciting stuff here. So without further ado, we will start, before even getting into the polls themselves, talking about the fact that we have a few teams that have already punched their ticket into the tournament, with a couple of the conference tournaments wrapping up. Stetson will be making their first ever NCAA tournament after winning the Atlantic Sun Conference this past weekend. They won the championship game in a high-scoring affair with Austin Peay, and we could maybe be seeing the birth of a March Madness legend. I don't want to overstate things here, but Jalen Blackman, the junior guard for Stetson, dropped, it was 43 points, I believe it was, in this matchup against Austin Peay. An incredible performance from him, and he is the 11th leading scorer in NCAA this season, averaging 21.5 points per game. He scored 43 points on 12 of 22 from the field and 5 of 9 from 3. So a very stunning performance individually. We have a team making their first ever NCAA tournament appearance. And again, Jalen Blackman, just a name to keep an eye on during the tournament coming up. We also had Drake back in the dance for the second straight year. They won the Missouri Valley Conference. They are another team with a big-time scorer to keep an eye on. Tucker DeVries, I apologize if I pronounced that wrong, but he's averaging 21.8 points per game this season. That is 5th in the country, as Drake has been a pretty nice program for the past handful of years, and they get themselves another chance by winning their conference tournament this season. The third team we also have as an auto bid is Longwood. Their second time making the tournament in the past 3 seasons. They won their Big South Championship this past weekend as well. So, getting to the polls for this week, we are just about wrapped up in the entirety of the top 3 being guaranteed 1 seeds in Houston, UConn, and Purdue. They are all currently 28-3 coming out of the regular season and have put together some incredible performances. Outright regular season champions for them. And it seems like even no matter how the conference tournament goes, they should be just about a lock to make the tournament this year. And not just make the tournament, but to be a 1 seed in it as well. So the question out of this group is who is going to be the number 1 overall seed. Houston has been the number 1 ranked team for the past few weeks in the AP poll, but a lot of people are expecting it to be Purdue based off of the body of work. All of their losses have come in quad 3, and Purdue, you can argue, has some of the most impressive wins, least disappointing losses. Now, I don't think they are the best team in the country. I say they are the most fraudulent out of them, UConn and Houston. I love UConn and Houston this year. I think they have real expectations to go and win it all this year. I'm not quite sold the same way on Purdue based off of their lack of depth, and they're very heavily, I wouldn't say they're reliant on free throws. Zach Edey gets the free throw line a ton. Now they have some other guys who can hit shots for them, I think, in a way that they haven't had in the past, and I've talked about Purdue a bunch on this show. I like Fletcher Lawyer. I like Lance Jones. Some of these other pieces are good players for them and can knock down shots. I just don't think that they have the depth really to go all the way. That being said, though, they have a very solid argument as to being the number one overall seed. But looking around elsewhere here, we have a big debate going on as in terms of who will be the final number one seed. Arizona only dropped one spot in the polls this week from number 5 to number 6, but I do think that they are a big loser from this past week based off of their chances of securing a number one seed. They got it sort of handed to them against USC. Now, this game was on the road. USC has been playing some better basketball as of late, but a team that has been very disappointing this year and will not be in the playoffs. They have a few bad losses this year, including a quad 3 loss, which the other teams vying for a 1 seed do not have. They have lost to Oregon State, Stanford, as well as this USC loss. So I think that they are probably disqualified from the number 1 seed with that loss. They are the outright regular season champs of the Pac-12. If they go on a run and win the Pac-12 in the tournament and have UNC and Tennessee both early exits against their conference rivals in the tournament, then perhaps we could see them sneak into the 1 seed. Tennessee also did lose this weekend, but I think it was a lot more respectable of a loss to Kentucky. Now, this game was at home, so it does hurt them, but I don't think it hurts them the same way that Arizona is hurt from this USC loss. And ultimately, Arizona is still a very good team as well. It's not like I'm counting them out from the tournament as a whole, just in terms of them being set up for the number 1 overall seed. I think that the final one is going to be going to North Carolina here, where they have put themselves in a really nice position. They climbed 3 spots in the polls this week, and they have a wonderful chance here in the ACC tournament that's a lot weaker to sort of come away with it, as opposed to Tennessee, who's the other team that's really in contention. But I think that the SEC is deeper, and there is more of a chance of them being upset. UNC just went on the road into Duke and were able to take down the Blue Devils in a big-time statement win. They sweep the season series there, and they're playing some really great basketball again, where they were positioned themselves really well for the number 1 seed for a lot of the year, but things started going sideways for them after they beat Duke, where they started dropping some more games in February, where they had lost to Clemson and Syracuse. But I think that they are back on the right trajectory here. Again, hard to say they're playing their best basketball of the year because they started out the year very well as well, but they are headed in the right direction, and I think that they probably lock up that final number 1 seed. Now, other movement here in the polls, we have Kentucky climbing up 6 spots, where, as we mentioned, they had just knocked off Tennessee on the road. There's no doubt about the talent level that is there with Kentucky. It's just a matter of the consistency of a very young team, of relying on a lot of buckets where they are not good on the defensive side of the ball, and they really are leaning heavily on these young guys to carry the offensive load for them. They've shown flashes that they can play some better defense, but it's still not there on a consistent basis, and they are one of those teams, I think, that can beat anybody in the tournament, but they could also suffer the hands of an upset against another team, assuming that they come out blazing offensively or Kentucky is just missing their shots. So again, a nice climb for them in the polls here, but I don't think that it really changes my overall view on them. A couple other teams that dropped some this past week would be Marquette. Now, wouldn't overreact to that, where Tyler Kolek was unable to play in the past couple games. So it's not that I feel differently about them as a team as a whole, but if they are going to make a run, they need Kolek back and healthy, and they need it very soon. We also had Alabama drop a handful of spots as well, where Bama is a team where they had a tough week. Tennessee handed it to them on their home court. They were then blown out by Florida on the road, where they allowed 105 points. And then I suppose credit to them for coming away with the game, but they should not have beaten Arkansas on Saturday, where they had to really climb back into it. It was a lot of Arkansas that's been a disappointing this year, imploding on themselves, but they at least come away with the win. So they drop a few spots. They're still obviously going to be in the tournament, but definitely a little bit of a disappointing week for them as a whole. Now, just some updates on what the schedule for today looks like, or for the week really looks like as a whole. We have the West Coast Conference tournament starting tonight with St. Mary's and Gonzaga not playing each other, but both playing as they look to further solidify themselves. I think at this point Gonzaga has to be in. Gonzaga, I got some negativity based off of the way that I pronounce their name. It's Gonzaga, but they should be in at this point. Just a matter of where they're going to see themselves be seated. And then you have the rest of the conference tournament starting later this week. You have a lot of ACC matchups on Tuesday. You get some Big 12 coming up in the next couple days as well. So we will be continuing to monitor these situations as the week plays out. Going to do one final check here just on the football front to see if we have any other news. We do have some contract details with the Falcons and Kirk Cousins, where it is a 4-year deal worth $180 million. So 45 per year is pretty crazy for a player in his mid-30s coming off of an Achilles injury. Now, I do think that this is probably a good move in terms of the Falcons headed in the right direction, but this is a move that definitely comes with risk as well. So will be very interesting to see what Raheem Morris and this Falcons coaching staff is able to come away with this run with, because they definitely just shelled out the money for it. And we've seen some of these veteran quarterbacks as of late not quite live up to expectations. Russell Wilson being an example of that just the past couple seasons. But that is all we have time for today. Thank you very much for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe, wherever you may be keeping up with us. And we will be back tomorrow at 2 o'clock. So we will see you then.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great.